because we are all in this greenhouse together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, one thing I really want your generation to embrace is that the Earth is a closed system. We cannot leave the Earth. There's no place to go.
Hey guys, George Mesa here, Third Eye Edify podcast. And interesting little clips from two very interesting people. Not from very far backgrounds as far as I know. The first one, Carl Sagan, actually was Bill Nye's professor. But that's just something I heard in watching some clips of this nature recently. But how interesting that they're both saying essentially the same thing, that we live inside of a greenhouse, a closed system. You can't get out. Now, before I even get to covering my bases here and not getting a lot of pushback for talking against these guys, yes, things can be taken out of context. Happens all the time. Happens to people like myself all the time. But I don't think I am. I mean, they obviously believe something different than that, but they say things sometimes that are a little confusing. Yes, there's apparently an atmosphere, keeps everything in as we're, spinning, and we have this spinning ball atmosphere on the edge of the vacuum of space. And maybe it breaks some of their thermodynamic laws and things of that nature, but that's a whole nother discussion. Hopefully with an expert on something like that, because I can't call myself an expert. But what interesting things. A lot of these guys, Carl Sagan, Bill Nye, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Elon Musk, those types, they usually have similar things that they call the things that we talk about, like the ocean of space, the grand ocean of the universe, or a greenhouse, this realm, this existence being in a greenhouse. It's been said. It's an interesting thing to mention at the very beginning here, but I think some people maybe aren't 100% sure who Carl Sagan is by sight or by sound. Somebody like myself, I certainly knew who he was growing up. And I think anyone that's maybe under 30-ish in years, maybe they don't know exactly who he is, but they know things he's done. He sent the Voyager record, the Pioneer plaque. I'll talk about that stuff in a little bit. But these are big accomplishments, obviously. He certainly has plenty of accolades. He's a well-researched guy. He really has a lot of information out there, shows, books, tons of information. But I recently read one of his books, his last book, actually, The Demon Haunted World. And it's very interesting. It came out the year that he passed away, as a matter of fact, 1996. And before I even get to why I named the episode what it's called, or any of the other things I'd like to talk about in this book, or any of the other research I've been doing in this category, let me start by saying this. These are human beings that we're talking about. I'm well aware of that. And these human beings have families, wives, husbands, grandsons, colleagues, plenty of love, plenty of good-natured human existence. I know that. I'm not trying to step on anyone or spit in their face, but when I read a book like this, with so many things that I think are either contradictory within the book or do rely on something along the lines of belief, along the lines of faith, I've got to question it, because often, as this book particularly does, especially in the first maybe like 60, 70% of the book, it's really about things that he constantly labels pseudoscience. And we'll see just what is called pseudoscience based on him, based on nowadays versus 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago. There's a lot to discuss there. There's a lot to unwrap and a lot to, I guess, bring to light, especially for people that aren't sure, because a lot of things get said in the public sphere, and it doesn't mean that everyone knows about it. If you're just following a certain line of news, you probably are only hearing the very divisive, crazy stuff that's going on right now, no matter what it is. I don't care, good or bad, red or blue, whatever. It's not about, I'm not here to discuss any of that, but there's a lot of unelected people, unelected officials, often in technology and science, that, of course, we need experts to do things to help us advance. But they're given a lot of credibility in a certain way that leads to the idea of something along the lines of faith, belief, required for all of this other stuff to make sense. This happens a lot. I think this book proves it. And having cleared the air there as best as I possibly could, there's plenty to say here. And I love how bold it is. It just comes right out. Now, it's nothing he hasn't said publicly in certain ways, but, putting in book form changes it, changes its attitude, changes its perspective on everything. But we'll get to what he means by demon-haunted world. It's not ghosts, I assure you. It's nothing about that at all. It's not about aliens either. There's so many pages that say the word UFO and abduction and, again, faith, things like that, psychotic kind of delusional things that may come up through trauma or other things that can explain UFO sightings, abduction stories. They're all the same. Where is this hive mind coming from? Television and entertainment. There's plenty of, I think, very good things that happen in this book. Very good explanations for things, very clear and obvious ones that he brushes over, but he mentions them. Things along the lines of media, entertainment, actually affecting how people can see things like UFOs and aliens and Area 51 and X-Files and all that other stuff, of course. And there's plenty of other good points about how politics can get in the way of true science, about advancing, developing better things, cheaper things, more beneficial things to health, to everything, school, education. He's got a lot of good points, and they're all, in my mind, very clear and obvious to most people nowadays, whether they play ball or not. At a societal level, people are aware of it and they acknowledge it more than ever, I think. And that's to the credit of technology, I imagine. The internet would be the main cause of anything like this, right? But why the title? Why remakes? Astronomical remakes. I was on 2 different shows about 2 years ago, 2 shows I admire very deeply, and I suggest if you're unaware of them that you get right on them, because they have so many, I assume 1,000 hours or more easily of information that you can just learn. You can learn from the experts and the interesting secret geniuses that get on these shows. I was on a show called Crow 777 Radio. That's the website, crow777radio.com, and you can search for my name, actually, if you're interested in go checking that out. We talked about how video games in particular, and that kind of entertainment, television required entertainment, did a lot of things and came from a very strange place to begin with. I highly suggest checking it out. It's a very interesting conversation. And then soon afterwards, I was had the pleasure of being on Chance Garton's wonderful show, Interverse Podcast. And we talked about a similar topic, more about a simulation level, almost where you lose track of yourself through the simulations you experience on a daily basis at the base level of the conversation. It went pretty deep, actually. And that has something to do with this, the simulation idea. Even Elon Musk, I remember, mentioned the simulation that we could or are living in, and it's been asked by many people. I know even Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about it once with something about, he said, how does Mario Brothers work, blah, 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 simulation, we live in a simulation. I mean, compared to what the universe might be, based on what they're saying, this is astronomers now, astrophysicists. Who knows, it could be a night and day difference between how we live versus the rest of this crazy, you see things a million years late from our point of view, universe, which I have a lot of trouble believing some of that stuff, I really do. Astronomical remakes, because you don't realize it when you grow up with something that maybe a lot of people actually don't know who Carl Sagan is, for example. Or maybe they've already heard. He's all over YouTube in little snippets, and obviously super popular. People might have heard his voice and speaking about, the planet, the universe in a certain way, very profound, kind of stoic voice that he, presents himself with, and maybe they don't know who he is. But those people definitely know who Bill Nye is and who Neil deGrasse Tyson is. These are like very heavily advertised compared to, the past astrophysicists and astronomers. But one thing that's very interesting about the pseudoscience claiming and name gaming in this book, some of it's obviously very legitimate. Of course, there's pseudoscience in every category of anything on this planet. Well, let's not call it a planet exactly, but anything in this realm, this world, to call astrology a pseudoscience. Many other things are being name called big time. And quackery, of course. Quacksilver is where that's coming from, the quicksilver in your body. I don't know how quacky that could be. That's a pretty legitimate thing as far as I know. Astrology in particular is attacked. And like I said, UFOs and UFO sightings, in that one is a good thing in my book. I don't prescribe to the UFOs or, entering our atmosphere, coming here all the time, not attacking us, but studying us and going completely unnoticed in every direction. They're walking through walls, which is mentioned a lot in this. Walk through walls, grab you, slip you out of the wall, take you to the ship, Now, again, didn't mean to veer again, but why remakes? I mentioned those two shows that I was on about 2 years ago because remakes were a very large topic in this entertainment discussion, particularly United States, Hollywoodish, or things of that nature, entertainment, movies, TV, video games. So many remakes. It's unavoidable. Everyone has heard or played or seen a remake at this point, and a lot of times people don't realize it's a remake. They don't always say it, especially with movies and stuff. A lot of movies come out and it says it's a remake of a movie from the 30s, but you don't know unless you dig a little. It's not really made obvious. In other words, they bring that same story. They want to make sure it's in your face again, for whatever reason. And there usually is, I assume, some kind of agenda or reason that particular story with particular concepts is remade or remastered or something and brought back to the attention of the public. Because why did we need a live action, Jungle Book? I assume not. I don't care if it looks good or not, whatever. Good for them. That's wonderful. It already happened. Remakes are an interesting way to keep the cultural mindset at a certain place, because the things that you had when maybe your grandparents were young are now right back in your face again. It's not just their memories anymore. Now you have the memory of it. And you can even end up saying, I saw the Jungle Book, like, oh, I saw that when I was 10. You're like, no, it just came out. Like, what do you mean it just came out? And things like that. I think it's the same thing with these astrophysicists. We've got Carl Sagan, whom people have heard things that he says, but don't know it's him. I don't know who he is. And then now we have people like Neil deGrasse Tyson and, again, Bill Nye. I know I keep saying the same ones. There are others, but these are the big boys, obviously, the big players, I'd say. They end up saying similar or exactly the same thing, and they seem to be playing it off as their own sometimes. Is this fine? Are they recalling, I'll show you in a little bit. Neil deGrasse Tyson says his own version of a quote that's directly out of this book, a unique and intriguing one, which I will discuss in a minute. But it's almost like he either has subconsciously has that in his mind ready to go because he read this book, obviously, like anyone of his nature would have read this book, or he really seems to be playing it off as his own, random thought to have about a certain thing that we will, once I show you the clip, it'll make sense. But why? That's a remake to me. It's as if they want to make sure whatever the wording is or whatever the topic is that they want you to know and have, in your back pocket somewhere for whatever reason, they bring it out in the next guy. Make sure he keeps that going. Why? It's almost like mythological stories where that they're not really to be taken at face value, but they explain or discuss something, often astrotheology or something along those lines, in a very just calling it out as it is. It's very often a story about what's above, what's in the stars. Very often. We can save that for a whole nother time. I assume some of my viewers will know something about that, but there's plenty to know here. And always leave a comment, please. You've got something to say to add. If I make a quote about something in the book and I don't say the whole thing and you're curious, I'll type out the whole paragraph that I got it from. I'll tell you what page it is in case you want to buy this book and read it. But that's just, I want to have a sense of transparency. That's a good thing for this particular type of relationship. So I think I talked about most of the good points in this book. There's definitely, and I want to get those out of the way before I move forward, there's definitely a lot of things that are very agreeable and I think very obvious as being problematic nowadays regarding stuff that happens from the tippy top that affects everyone at the very bottom in a certain way. One of the big things that isn't mentioned, in my opinion, is how it feels so contrived in this particular time, in this particular country, in this particular television age that we grew up in. For me, I know I particularly grew up in this. I was supposed to be a certain thing, the things I saw growing up. And that's not really mentioned. It's brushed over. It says that, entertainment can do these things. But it's a very, very small portion of a 400-ish page book. So keep that in mind. I'm always curious when they avoid the obvious stuff and move on to things that are very obscure and almost not very human, regarding the aliens in particular, which I will get to. I have some information on that too. But I think I discussed everything I wanted to mention from the good stuff here. Doesn't seem to appreciate something along the lines of the way Congress may treat funding for science. I think that's obviously a good thing, but it depends on what branch we're talking about. Does NASA need more money? No. I think they're doing okay with their daily paycheck that they get to do what they got to do. Knowing that it takes a number of facilities to build one of these spaceships that they don't seem to build a ton of, it seems odd that they would compartmentalize the creation of these things when a company like SpaceX is doing it all in the one spot. And NASA now funds them, and they're doing a ton of other stuff too, which is probably to be saved for another day. One other thing that was mentioned, and I think was a very, very important thing for nowadays, after having gone through the whole online learning, virtual learning versus going to actual school for the kids, grade school and younger, even kindergarten, I guess. He mentions that quick changes in technology, quick changes in culture overall, lead to very confusing and difficult times in the education system. Mass education, of course, maybe not homeschooling. But this is a very interesting topic that is worth fleshing out, and I think it's very true. And it even came up in that interview I had with Spiro, where the pyramid, the food pyramid, changed to my plate, and he was going to school for these kinds of things at that time, and suddenly the curriculum changed, the syllabus changed for these teachers. They had to kind of just stuff a new topic and then replace an old one, and it led to some confusion. It led to teachers not exactly knowing what they were supposed to be teaching about it, and it also led to, well, goes without saying, not getting your money's worth, I guess, at this point, going for something like nutrition, which is what I think he was going for. It's a very good point to make. It's a very solid and smart point. This book is well researched. It's got lots of different references. It references tons of different time periods and people. And it's not just books, it's papers, it's other things, that journals and things that are, a number of different sources are mentioned. And since he wrote this right at the end, I think he probably had a lot of this cataloged in his mind, and maybe he went back and just kind of like filled in the year or whatever. But he knew a lot of this. It seemed like he wrote this just kind of from the hip, which is always a good thing to see. But again, there's some contradictory things that I'm going to get to. And the reason I'm even talking in depth about this book in particular, and relating to this topic, is because of the nature of the title, The Demon-Haunted World. What does he mean by that? We'll get to that in just a moment. One last thing he mentioned was about teaching and the way that people become uninterested in math, uninterested in science and technology in school early on. And I know I was surrounded by people that particularly hated doing any math, or just dreaded it or said it was impossible. And meanwhile, impossible is a pretty bold statement for that. I doubt it. Anyone's capable of a lot, really. Something he mentioned in the book too. He said that people can memorize years of statistics in a sport, and they're worried about all the science information required to get into a field like this. And people can handle the information. There's ways to memorize anything for anybody. Everyone learns differently, but it can be done. Our brains are incredible. He mentions, and I almost got this before, speaking to non-professionals as simply as possible. This is the kind of concept that should be universal. If you are an expert, a master, a teacher, and you're speaking to someone that isn't, you don't use the same lingo that you would speaking to a colleague. You wouldn't do that. That's not how you teach anything, really. You have to make sure the information makes sense, and you can use the terms that you want to speak about something a certain way. Otherwise, you have to dumb it down. And most things can be dumbed down, even though our language, I hear, has less words than a lot of other ones. We can really express things in a lot of detail, and it's a wonderful thing, of course. So this idea of belief that I had mentioned earlier, belief, faith. I really think that it's a major factor here with this type of information. You have to believe certain things in order for evolution to be real, in order for things I had mentioned in the previous episode of The Words. We were discussing, certain theories, certain concepts that all came around the same time, by the way, around 1850-ish, which I think is already very interesting. All these things that were just new thoughts at the time scientifically that became a huge part of the 20th century, and through the ranks of everything, including education. When these things all come together, they are the only way they can make sense. They all have to collide and exist together. Big Bang, evolution, dinosaurs, all that stuff. Everything has to be 100% right in order for all of the theories spelled out and now taken very seriously as fact. They have to all work, and they require some belief, especially when you go to look at some of these things and all you can get are self-proclaimed computer images and images created by certain people to have references, which of course is part of the deal. You want that in a certain way, especially when you're creating ideas and trying to work them out. You probably need some sketches and diagrams and things of that nature. But what about, DNA? What about the molten core of the Earth? What about satellites? If you look up any of these things, you get computer images. That's all you get. It's just nothing new. You just don't realize it. You don't realize it till you go to do it. And images of the Earth are the same. I remember one particular, maybe North America or Africa, very, very different size on the two same sized images of the Earth. I mean, they say that they have to put it together because they can't just take a picture. That, whether or not that's true, at least they're admitting it, and people just don't know that. Look into it. I'm not lying or exaggerating here. There's plenty of things left to figure out. Keep that in mind too, please. So, one of the things that, before I really dive into this book, one of the things that Carl Sagan is very well known for is his input into what got sent into the Voyager and Pioneer probes that went into deep space to find out as much information as possible about anything that it could get near, or planets in the solar system and things of that nature, or the further deeper space. There was a record and a plaque made of gold placed on these things, and they had certain images on them, images that would convey some kind of information if some life form found them. And he very succinctly put that the spacecraft will be encountered. That's the Voyager or the Pioneer. These are the early and a little bit later than mid-70s when these things happened. The spacecraft will be encountered, and the record played only if there are spacefaring civilizations in interstellar space. But this bottle into the cosmic ocean, and there's something I mentioned earlier, says something very hopeful about life on this planet. Now, yeah, I imagine if accomplishing something like this would be a big deal for humankind, and it would mean that we've accomplished something pretty unbelievable. But what was chosen to put on it is a little strange. Now, I was not part of this project. Neither were you. And this is something that I think is... Take a look at this. Here's the Pioneer plaque. And yes, it is made out of gold. Obviously, there's images of us from the front. And we're nude to show that we have differences in certain spots. It's a very important thing. You can even see a slight difference in muscle structure based on the simple designs that were given here. We also have a few other things that may be slightly more confusing depending on how you look at it or what it is. It's nothing crazy, but you can see the sun and the planets at the very bottom there. They're trying to point out exactly where they happen to be. If they were to find this thing, where we are, where it was sent from, I guess is what that's trying to say. There's something here that's also on the Voyager record. These arrays that you see coming from a single point, they're trying to use pulsars to show the distance to the sun. And in the lines, you can see those lines have slashes and things in them. They're not random. This is all supposed to be binary code. Binary code. Morse code. It's odd. I think, overall, yes, we want to have the things that are on there as far as the human picture, the sun, the planets, obviously. We want to show them that we are not just, if in fact it is the way it is, we know that we're not just sitting all by ourselves. We have this expanse around us and space and stuff like that. But Morse code, binary code, I can't imagine how sterile that must seem to if there was a super duper advanced life form. I don't think there would be, even if they did, maybe, use the primitive system that is binary code. Even if they did use that. And I say primitive lightly because it's just 1 or 0. There's on or off, or that's it. There is nothing else. It's a string of that. And that, on its description, is a very simple primitive thing. There's no third option. Everything goes through 1s and 0s. So to show binary code, to show Morse code, Morse code is a fairly human-created thing, and so is binary, but it acts differently. At least with Morse code, yeah, if you know it, you know it. If you don't, you have no idea. It would be as useful as writing something in English, which they did send some of that. The Voyager record here actually has, well, I guess what you could call, there's music, there's images, there's a lot of different languages being spoken, there's videos, there's descriptions of the planet, of what love is, and all these other things. Now we want that. Of course we want that. But again, this has, at the top left, there's a wheel. This is a record being viewed with the stylus on the outside of it. And what this is trying to describe is, if they can use, how to use this record. I mean, that's obviously, you want that. But then it's shown, again, it has a binary, Morse codey thing on the outside trying to describe exactly how to use it. There's lots of other, you can see little quick diagrams, some waveforms. These things are, yes, they're universal things we have. Nobody's saying that this was some idiot's project. Clearly a lot of ideas went into this, but we're giving them things that require Morse code and binary code to decode. I'm not sure I don't get it. I think that's a little weird. Show them many things, symbols. Show them it more clearly how we look at math, perhaps. Why those things? The binary code is a computer language. Why are we handing them a computer language? It's strange to me. It just really, and just a quick another look at some of these other things here. They showed a woman eating, I guess, some grapes in a vegetable section of the supermarket, and just look at what that first price is on the top left there. It's $1.19. You fill in the blank there. I'm not gonna even say it, but if you reverse it, it does look a certain way. And they also sent something like this, where we have people eating. We have like a already chewed on one side, grilled cheese. This guy's chugging water out of a large pitcher, and this woman is licking ice cream from the profile view. So again, I keep saying again, I know, but is that exactly what we wanted to send into outer space? Maybe they're just having some fun. It's fine. I'm not ridiculing this project overall. I'll ridicule the fact that they tried to put Here Comes the Sun from the Beatles, and EMI said no. I will ridicule that. Who would even bother saying no to such an unbelievably ambitious and pioneering project that are sending out pioneering, and no pun intended, pioneer plaque? Why in the world would anyone ever say no? They were expecting more money, less money, do it for free. This is supposed to be one of the most important things that's ever happened. That physical attempt at contacting an outside life force, who may or may not be able to at least see that something's going on here. I'm just a little perplexed about it. But not as perplexed as I am about some of the concepts that happen in this book. So I think before I do it, let me just play one clip here. Another clip from Neil deGrasse Tyson.
You know what would make good data? You're in the flying saucer, whatever it is they came here in. Tell the alien, go look over there, and then while they look away, snatch something off the shelf, like an ashtray or something. I don't know if the aliens smoke. Something. Anything off an alien spaceship is going to be interesting. Anything. I promise.
Okay, so he mentions a little, it's almost like an anecdote, but it's not even a real story, it's just an idea. People are saying, isn't my story proof enough? He's like, you want to convince me? Convince them to look behind or try to, grab their attention in some way. Grab an ashtray. I don't know if they smoke, but grab an ashtray. It's in this Carl Sagan book. It's the same exact thing. He says, give me an ashtray. I don't know if they smoke. who's saying ashtray? We're talking about aliens here. Why are we talking about ashtrays? It seems like such a strange left field thing, and maybe Carl Sagan meant it as half a joke. But now, remakes, 10, 20 years later, Neil deGrasse Tyson comes on a show or some, quick little podcast, whatever it is, and says essentially the same exact story, but trying to pass it off as his own. Again, remake. So I did find it a little strange. And lots of other things that seem kind of strange here in this book. What is a demon? What is a haunt? Got a few quick little, as I always will love to do, got some ideas about them on paper as far as their definitions. And because when you hear demon haunted world now, in this time and place in our culture, this is being recorded in 2022, I think that means something very specific. It evokes images. It may even evoke fear, or at least concern for those involved in that aura of the demon. What is astrology and what is astronomy? Why is this book trying to say a lot that astrology is not only pseudoscience, but a complete farce, an absolutely useless form of studying our world, what goes on above, what do we see, what is happening, why are there 7 chakras, 7 bodies, 7 notes in a major scale in music, followed by the octave. As we ascend, we go through octaves. 7 colors, 7 types of light in the visible spectrum? I think so. So this 7 number comes up a lot here. There's something to it. That's already saying a lot, in my opinion. That's already saying that there's more to the story, that there's plenty more to be learned and figured out here, or maybe some people know and they can't get the information out, because that's kind of a hard thing to do nowadays, getting out truth. It's hard. So what's the difference in the definition, at the very least? Astro always means star. Aster, you can see it that way too. Astrology, as in L-O-G-Y. Logos, reason, judgment, understanding. The understanding of the stars. Astronomy, nomi, method, manage, law, custom. I don't know. It's kind of a little more flaccid, I guess is the word. A little more sterile of a description of things, but Thomas Burgoyne, in The Light of Egypt, the book I heard about on one of those shows I was on earlier, that I mentioned earlier, mentioned that astrology is correspondences, and astronomy is the lifeless glove that fits over the hand of astrology, let's say. There's a lot of people over time, Guido of Arezzo with music, and people that have with the stars, they've assigned certain things to the 5 fingers and had a way of memorizing through it. I think that's what he meant to say, that astrology works on how the stars and the planets align for yourself, so you can better yourself, your health, your well-being, your life expectancy even. Astronomy is just kind of figure out, what's the material of Mars, or why do the planets orbit. The sun, of course, even though looking up feels a lot different than that. And that's a whole other discussion. What is a demon? Around 1200, it's an evil spirit. Before that, though, way before that, in Greece, daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N. Add a D to that, you get diamond, by the way. Big thing in our culture, obviously. In Greek, it was a deity, a divine power, a guiding spirit. And in Latin, daemon, D-A-E-M-O-N, a spirit. And it's all over computer code, by the way. Refresh daemon is a big part of, a lot of parts of certain paths in code. If he's watching, he knows who he is. I saw at a friend's house early on when Doom was Doom had a pretty popular run a long time ago in the mid-90s. And when you would use, and you would go to MS-DOS, you wouldn't even have Windows at the time. You would go to Doom and it said refresh daemon right on the screen, as the game was loading up. And you could see it on the black screen with all the white, the white code. That's so interesting to me. The code has this word in it. It just seems very odd. What's a haunt? It's a place frequently visited. If you may have heard the term that somebody haunts a place, like a bar or a convenience store, or in their house is a dwelling, could be a dwelling. That's from circa 1300. So where there wasn't negative until around 1850. Hey, that's that time period I was discussing. A lot of things changed in 1850-ish for sure. Something to look into for real, And throw it in there, a greenhouse is a building, roof and sides made of glass and contains an atmosphere in it, essentially. So that's, again, very interesting. So, why the demon-haunted world? The quote really is referring to what happens when, in his words, in the terms of his book, when science goes astray in the mind of the public, when science is used for evils in the mind of people that are manipulating those who may be easily manipulated to believe things like a fake channeler, or some, like, new agey fake tarot reader who has no idea about it, or a person using a Ouija board, or the way they used to have those tables that would kind of shake and jitter, I think in the early 1900s, maybe earlier, and people were convinced there were spirits in the room, but the lights were pretty dark. Now, again, this book has plenty of things that are obviously debunked and disprovable in every way, and that's, of course, fine. But to say that those practicing pseudoscience are essentially demons, haunting the general public into believing certain things, or keeping real information out of hand, out of touch, out of reach. I'm one of these demons, apparently. I've got kids, I've got family, I got friends. I'm not trying to lead anyone astray. I'm speaking from a place of truth. And what I mean by that is I'm taking an honest approach and an honest crack at things, and saying things that are honestly pretty risky. And I wouldn't do that unless I felt a genuine passion for it. And it's part of the purpose of this show and what human beings can be in general, really. So I think there's a lot of picking and choosing going on with what's clearly dismissed as pseudoscience in this book. And let me just give you a quick list. Faith healers, I'm sure a lot of them are pretty bogus. The Flat Earth Society, which nobody who even thinks that way has any association with whatsoever. They're there as a shill to begin with. Fortune tellers, yes, obviously there could be problems with that. Psychic Friends Network, Chloe, if any of you are old enough to remember that. Yeah, clearly maybe seems like a fraud, but there's so much to it. And there's so much that is absolutely not fraud, for sure. Germ deniers, don't even get there. Water memory. I know there was a guest on that Crow 777 radio show I mentioned, an expert at water, and I think he would disagree. Say the very least, I think he would disagree with saying that water doesn't have a memory, or that water doesn't retain some kind of properties over a certain amount of time. Look into it, really. It's quite interesting, to say the least, that whole study. There's so many different things that can lead to. That's a whole another conversation, that whole water memory thing. Pseudoscience, though. It's straight up pseudoscience, no questions. Yeah, there's a lot of disproven ghost and UFO things over the course of those things. But, it's hard to imagine that everything that was mentioned and or skipped over in this book could truly be pseudoscience, especially astrology. When did astrology become astronomy? When did it pass over into this new realm of, exploring the final frontier? I don't know. I do, I guess, but it's a shame that it really went this way, And again, basing things on advanced maths and assumptions, when, binary code, it kills me. We sent binary code into space. That's what we want to be shown as. There was other recordings of language and stuff, but they have to be able to play the record. Maybe they could, but they, as in the advanced life forms. But he, when it comes to the pseudoscience people, he wants to ask reasonable questions. He's saying, you've channeled somebody from 2,000 years ago. Why do they speak English? What is your culture like? What did you eat? These are very good questions to ask a medium if they're trying to channel somebody for you, right? See if they can get it right. These certain very particular aspects. Maybe an older language. Maybe a long forgotten language that was not known. When it comes to aliens, though, he wants to see if they know Fermat's last theorem. Like, AN plus BN equals CN is not going to be a positive integer if n is greater than 2, right? Okay, fine. Maybe they're smart enough to see things on paper and just kind of figure it out, but do they even use any of these ideas? N being something, we're looking at like English letters here, and, to have like an equation like that to be what he thinks he wants us to ask an alien. I have way different questions for aliens. That's, again, as I always say, is a conversation for another day. He mentioned that he's convinced that babies smiled less when we were first kind of growing in caves, I guess, as hunter-gatherers, cavemen, and some of the first humans, sapiens, whatever you want to call it, said that they smiled less. Their parents smiled less at them. They recognized this. They didn't recognize faces as easily. We're talking about human babies here. Are we just have like heartless ancestry? I don't quite understand that. And don't mind me looking. I'm trying to not stare at these notes as much as possible here, but I do have some kind of a path planned here. It's a very odd comment, I thought, that babies were smiling less. I can't imagine a mother not having a baby and then not loving it to pieces until it was ready. Babies can't do anything on their own. Did these caveman babies have a different, were they walking like bam bam, like right away, from the Flintstones? I don't know. I really don't know. But it's a very odd to have and there's nothing placed in that where it is in the book. He doesn't reference anything. He's not saying somebody else said it and makes sense. He's pretty much just straight up guessing. And that's fine, but there's that belief faith thing again. It's in here. It's in this book. Trust me. Read it yourself. Don't trust me. I want you to figure these things out on your own. I might give you a kicker to go check it out, or any of his stuff. There's some other interesting books that came out from the other two guys I've been mentioning the most today. Accessory to War, How Did I Get Here, things like that. These are very interesting reads, and there's a lot to it, really. Oh, I often hear in this book, no matter too sensitive. There's a chapter called No Such Thing as a Dumb Question. It's one of the chapters in this book. No matter's too sensitive. I think it's provably wrong simply by reading the beginning of this book. Just the very beginning. He speaks of a cab ride where the guy was obviously clueless, has no idea how science works, he said. And science, to him being relatively young, he was quoting this guy Alan Cromer from 93, saying that science is new. Maybe it's only a few centuries old. Perhaps it was a fluke. Would it have ever happened? Science? Is science a fluke? Do you think in your heart and soul, do you think that human beings never would have achieved any scientific ideas naturally? Just by being hungry? Figuring out how to eat what's around you. Maybe animal, maybe plant, whatever. Or figuring out how rainwater can be manipulated, kept, stored, drank. Is that not science already? How are we missing science? Our fingernails get pretty big. Did we let them grow? Did we chip them down? Did we bite them? Did we grind them? Who knows? But just fingernail maintenance is science. It grows back. I don't get it, but I'm going to try to figure it out. That this is, of course, science happened. It's not a fluke. Science is. We are science. We are scientists. We're all scientists in some way. Or gentlemen scientists, as they may have called it, without the backing, of course, without the financial backing. It's really, I hope that these are interesting points that are helping you think about certain things and to give you, again, a push to do some research on your own. Find some time to do some research. I'm just surrounded by stuff to do, but this is my thing right now. You may not have able to dedicate the kind of time I am currently to it, but even if it's just an hour a week, look up something you always wanted to, or clarify something you thought you knew. Mesmerism. Do you really know what it is? There's lots of things to clarify. Trust me. Like it or not, we are stuck with science. We have made a bargain in our favor. This is a quote from the book. A bargain. It makes it sound like it's a Faustian kind of deal. I don't know why it's mentioned that way. And am I taking it out of context? I don't really think I am. No, I read this book thoroughly. I don't think I'm taking things out of context. And you know what? Again, so what if it's a little askew from what was meant? There's a lot of accusations in this book that go a long way to convince people that certain things are real, regardless of how much information can be taught, because it's also mathematical and requires so much schooling where you're too dumb to understand it. Rocket science, for example, or something like that. No, you can't even get here. How many places teach astrophysics, for example, right? Science offers the gift of life, as in food, and I think the Earth offers this on its own, but science permits us to feed, is a quote from this book. Science permits us to feed. It's hard for me to comment on that. It really is. It's an odd thing. Something to think about, right? So, there's several other things that we can kind of quickly mention here, because I want to relate actually the beginning of the last video. You saw me reading a book called Demonology from King James, the one and only from the King James Bible. King James the Sixth and the First is his full title. And he wrote this book, Demonology, about witches and how and why we should be dealing with them and how they do their thing. Whatever nonsense skewed vision of that it is. And then very soon afterwards, the King James Bible came out, the KJV, not long afterwards. So there's a lot of talks about witch trials in this book. There's a lot of talks about the wrongs that were done, as a matter of fact, and how pseudoscience was used to prove them witches. Very agreeable information. But he mentions quickly that King James wrote this demonology book. There's other books that are referenced much heavier. And then he quickly moves on to say that the translator of the very exquisite KJV, King James version of the Bible, pretty much the one we all know, whether, if that's your holy book, I necessarily haven't read it myself, but I own one now. I'm going to dig into it. There's some interesting things in there. He says, as long as, if you take it at face value, talking about the Bible, if you take it at face value, none of it makes any sense. Like, yeah, well, not supposed to. There's 4 different ways to read every sentence in that book and other books like it. The Quran, whatever else you want to label as that type of book. I don't understand, and I'm not taking it out of context. In where it's placed in the book, it clearly says it. That you're, taking it at face value. I think I might have even written down what he said about that one thing. If you accept literally the Bible, blah, 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 blah. And just to prove the pseudoscience of believing in religion, of having faith in religion, right? To prove scientific things. Disproving astrology, even though it's all over these kinds of books. How many books have astrology in them secretly, in an occult fashion, esoterically? A lot. Some of these books require 3, 4, 5 readings, or an expert nearby just to bounce ideas back and forth, because somebody might not have ever seen the one way you noticed it to be. Some chapter, some phrase, some psalm, whatever it is. Just a lot to think about. It's a lot to think about, I know. But, that's why we're here. That's why we're here. I find it so odd. So odd, the things that are, the way that things are glanced over in a certain way. Didn't stick to the King James thing at all. Called the translation exquisite, as in, yeah, okay, so you mean it's an amazing translation. He's researched enough to maybe have a reference. Maybe he read the old stuff, Apocrypha, or other, older versions of the Bible that were, Latin, Greek, before the English translation, where there's obviously some marked differences. I've mentioned in a previous episode or two how many times I'm reading old Latin books, translated, German, translated. I have to rely on the translation. If you don't know German, you're not going to read Nietzsche as is. You're not. If it rhymes in the translation, it was altered. It shouldn't also rhyme in 2 different languages. That's nearly impossible, in my opinion. Nearly impossible. But again, a lot to it, and very intriguing, very interesting thing. So let's look at one last quote from one of these guys, and maybe we'll kind of find the finish line here after discussing that for a little bit.
Is math related to science?
Math is the language of the universe.
Numbers.
If you want to go to China and speak to Chinese people, you learn Mandarin, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Go to Spain, you learn Spanish.
Yeah.
You want to go to the universe, you learn math. It's that simple.
Language of the universe is math. This comes back to what I was talking about with the binary code, with the Morse code. Yes, I imagine an orbit, a distance. These can be mathematically calculated, but that doesn't mean that that is the reality of it. Astrology doesn't look to get distances, even though now we're kind of in a camp where we have to, just to prove our own points and see where the burden of truth really lies in a lot of these concepts lately. Yes, there's a huge difference between a mathematical calculation and math being a language that is required for anyone from anywhere to discuss something. That rhythm is a much more universal language. Music in general. Maybe even symbology may be more of a language than math regarding discussing almost anything. Math does require some ability. An interesting parallel with the concept I discussed on some of those other shows about the video games, especially with the newer ones where there's 8, 10, 12 buttons to understand or more. That's a complicated endeavor. You can't. A lot of these games have information, occult information, hidden ideas, but only the best gamers will see them. You have to either get to the end of the game, or get to like certain secret areas that are hard to find, and you have to be good at the game. So they're risking, if somebody really wants that information out there, they're risking a lot of people not seeing it just because of that. Or do they rely on the YouTube generation to put it in everyone's faces? A lot of people play through entire games visually and never touch the game. Now, YouTube has the whole game. You can watch the whole game. You don't have to play games anymore. So when I hear a lot of this, they talk about math being the language of the universe, I want to know how many of you feel that way. Do you think math is the language of the universe? Yes, 2 + 2 = 4. 1 - 1 is 0. Yes, this is important. Simple math is very important. Very important in a lot of ways. And a lot of people lack it, and they almost feel dumb because they know they don't know certain things. People feel dumb. People come off as dumb even if they're not. And most people are not at all, by the way. Just because you don't know math doesn't mean you're dumb at all. Same thing with music. You don't know how to play an instrument. You're not dumb. You could. It's never too late. It's never, ever too late to learn instrument, language, math. Music and math are languages. I'm not denying that either. Showing an equation to somebody means something to somebody, doesn't mean something to somebody else. This is how language works. If you don't know Sanskrit, it ain't going to look like much to you. And then you find that it has an incredible, large catalog of things that are almost identical in our language. We have so much from the older languages. It's very intriguing and will be an entire concept for sure for another episode. But really, this is my final point here, I guess, that as far as this Neil deGrasse Tyson comment. I know what that video has turned into. It's a meme, I get it. Katy Perry sounds kind of a little silly sometimes and a little stupid saying some of the things she says in that interview. I'm not sure who set that interview up or whatever you want to call that, but it's not important. What's important is the information that came out of it. A lot of things he said before. It's not like he's starting from scratch and found a brand new audience just because of that video, but it's being taken in the opposite direction, possibly on purpose. Look how stupid she is. She has no idea that math is the language of the universe. She has no idea. I think a lot of people wouldn't think that. Now, we need great thinkers to think ways that most people haven't. Excuse me. This is different. This is definitely different. And I want to know why, but as I've said it enough already, why are we sending binary code into the deep space? It's the least human thing. And if they don't play the record, it's what they're going to see. They're going to see that and wonder, I think. What is this? Advanced or not, it doesn't matter. That's our machinations. They have their own. And I genuinely wonder if that would have been successful. And they showed the planets lined up. If they find it very far away, I don't know if they have the catalog of our little solar system. And again, this is coming from me just going along with what they're saying. You have to believe all that stuff for things like gravity to hold water. And the moon does indeed affect the tides, doesn't it? The menstrual cycle is the same time period as a month, as the time it takes for a moon to transition. And why are we denying something that clearly has at least some relationship to our natural world? The invisible part of the natural world, playing a scale, is that a visual thing? On an instrument it might be, but to listen you require no vision whatsoever. These things align with frequencies that can give us certain feelings. The combination of frequencies make harmonies, chords. They give us very specific feelings. A minor chord can make a lot of people feel a very certain way, a very similar way, I should say. And I'm mentioning music in general because 12 notes in the music scale equals for equal temperament. And if you're not sure what that means, I'm going to have a very large catalog of music information, I'm sure, on this show very soon. 12 notes in music, 12 signs of the zodiac. 7 heavenly bodies, as they're called, even in this book, and 7 notes in the major scale. 7 chakras. There is something to it. There has to be. And there's been quite a few books written about it, as a matter of fact, old and new. Interested to know what books I'm talking about? Catch me in the comments. I'll respond gladly, and I'd love to have a conversation. I've got a lot of things planned, a lot of shows, a lot of guests, very interesting, varied topics. And you have something that you have a fiery topic you want to debate, or you have more information beyond what I've said today, and I'm sure some of you do, find me in the comments. I'll put you on my show. I want to talk to anyone that's willing to speak about these things. There is so much to get to, and we have so little time. And I hope that we've been pushed forward enough to gain from things like this show. That's the point here on Third Eye Edify podcast. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys next time.